And boom, we are live for another episode of AlphaCast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here today, of course, with Dr. Lando from Alfa Vedic. Today, we've got a really cool topic and an awesome guest on. Austrian film director P.A. Straubinger is a graduate with honors from the renowned University of, of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna. He has more than 2 decades of experience as a journalist for the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation. And in the 1990s, his interest in transpersonal psychology led to intensive practice in yoga and meditation. A personal encounter in the spring of 2000 awakened his interest in the strange topic of breatharianism. He met a meditation teacher who allegedly had not eaten for more than a year. He's still skeptical. He started a 10-year journey of research from around the globe on this topic, searching for traces of evidence and skeptical scrutiny of this human mystery. 200 hours of footage were edited into the 90-minute feature documentary, In the Beginning, There Was Light. It premiered at the International Film Festival in Cannes and became one of the most influential and successful feature documentaries in Austrian cinema history. When it was shown in prime time on national television, viewership outnumbered Hollywood blockbusters like Harry Potter. This then led to a huge public discussion. So very excited to have PA on today because this is a topic that we bring up a lot on our AlphaCast, and it's something that really resonates with us because we explain a lot of the science behind why breatharianism, in fact, is a real thing. And for those who haven't seen the film, we will link it in the show notes and drop it in the chat here. But welcome, PA. Great to have you on today.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm looking forward to discuss with you a lot of the stuff that is really interesting surrounding the topic of breatharianism.
Yes, for sure.
Peter, thank you so much for being with us. I've watched your video and enjoyed it very much. It's a topic that we have delved into quite a bit, and I know it's evening your time. You already had a full day, so you're very generous being here with us, and we sure appreciate it. So just anxious to hear about your whole journey, not only making the film, but what you learned from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward for your questions. Should I start talking why I did it and what happened? How should we do it?
Well, that could be a good start. Curious I kind of gave a quick summary there, but what led you down the path towards breatharianism? Because many people have never even heard of that, what that is. And I believe it's also called, what is it, Inadia in the Vedic circles. I mean, this goes back thousands of years, and there's multiple traditions of breatharianism. But give us a little insight into what drew you down this pathway here.
Absolutely. So, as you said, it's a topic that is not very popular, and I have to admit, in the 90s, I saw a documentary about the Swiss national saint, Nicholas of Flue. And I saw in this documentary, they said that he lived the last 20 years of his life without eating and drinking. And by then I thought this is just a Catholic myth and it's just a made up story. And I also have to say that by then I had a quite closed-minded view of the world. I believed that all these stories, biology and physics, told me how the world works are true. So I thought it's just nonsense. But I got interested in meditation and yoga and so on. And as you said, in the spring of 2000, I met a meditation teacher, an Austrian meditation teacher. And I learned a special meditation technique. And after a few weeks, I heard from other students. They said, do you know that this guy doesn't eat? And so I asked him if this is true. And he said, yes, he did this strange process and he did not eat for more than a year. He just drinks water. So it sounded quite believable. But on the other hand, I thought, if this is true, why aren't there dozens of scientific studies, and why aren't there thousands of articles in newspapers about it because everybody is making fun of this topic. So there was a kind of controversy in my own head. My heart believed it in a way. It sounded credible, but my head said, this can't just be. Because, of course, there are thousands of people starving every day. And I also have to say, a lot of people died trying to do this 21-day process. And so this is true, of course, as well. But still, this sounded for me credible. So I started doing research on my own, and I saw this Breatharianism topic isn't something that was invented by esoterics in the 1990s, but this is something you find all over the world, in all cultures, through all times. In China, they call it bigu, for example, bigu fuqi, which means without bread, but directly through qi. And I got familiar with this idea of life energy that they call prana in India. And I mean, probably you, as an Ayurvedic specialist, you probably know a lot about it. And I found out that Western science just isn't dealing with this concept of life energy. And that life energy is the biggest mystery we have on this planet. And that living directly from this mysterious energy is something you find in a lot of people, also in Christian saints. And this has nothing to do with ideology or religion, because there are also people who are not meditation gurus or something. There's, for example, a woman in Bavaria. She got sick at the age of 12 years, and then she didn't eat anymore. She was just drinking water. She never had the urge of giving out a message to the world. She was just living that way. And the king of Bavaria, they invited her to a hospital in Munich, and the doctors just found out that this seems to be true. And nowadays we also have these studies. In my film, you see this study about Yogi Prahaladhyani. It's said that he didn't eat and drink for the last 70 years. I mean, it seems completely crazy, but there was a study with him at the Sterling Hospital in Ahmedabad in India. And the Indian military was involved in this study, and there were dozens of doctors, and they had video monitoring all the time. And they found that in these 10 and 15 days, there were 2 studies, he didn't eat, he didn't drink, and he didn't urinate. So not eating for 15 days is no problem for anybody. And probably it's not even a problem for a lot of us not drinking for 10 days. But what is really inconceivable for classical science is that somebody isn't drinking and urinating for the 10 days or for 15 days, because then you start intoxicating yourself. So, of course, we have no proof that this guy didn't eat for 70 years and didn't drink for 70 years, because there's just no scientific proof. But seeing that this guy didn't eat and drink and urinate for 15 days and he had stable blood counts shows that there is something to it. It's a strong indication. And the longest study we have is on Hiro Ratan Manik, the sun gazer, the father of sun gazing. He was in this study on a 0-calorie diet for 410 days, just drinking water. He lost 19 kilos during this time. And this, of course, isn't the proof that it's possible to live completely without food, but it shows there is a lot more possible than we can imagine. And later on, we will see that the reason why some breatharians often underperform in these studies is that they are locked in rooms and they get air from the air condition. And because we will see, and later on we will talk about that these people, of course, are also nourished. They are not completely independent from the surroundings, but they are nourished in a different way. Actually, we all are living on light, but some more, some less. In Austria, I wrote a very successful book about intermittent fasting. And actually, it came out in 2019, and we are the most successful book of the year because intermittent fasting, at least in Austria, I think in the States, it's similar, is going through the roof. And in this book, I tried to explain my readers that we are all living on light to a certain extent. There is this calorie myth, and people think that we are just some kind of combustion engine, that you have to fill with fuel and you mix it with oxygen and then the energy comes out. But it's so much more complicated. And the interesting thing is that when you look at the human energy balance and you compare direct and indirect calorimetry, so you look how much oxygen goes in and how much carbon dioxide goes out and calculate the theoretical amount of energy and compare it with the actually produced energy, you see there are a lot of differences. And already in the 1970s, there was a study published in Nature, the most renowned scientific journal in the world. And there was an article published in 1972 with the name, "How Much Food Does Man Require?" And the bottom line of this article is, we do not know, because it differs from person to person and from situation to situation. I mean, everybody knows this. There are people who eat, who can really eat a lot, like me, for example, and they do not gain weight. And there are others who eat very little and they gain weight. So it's obvious that the caloric theory doesn't work. But it's so strong, the idea is so strong that people still think in terms of calories. And in the 1980s, there was Dr. Paul Webb. He was a researcher for NASA. And Dr. Paul Webb did a very, very sophisticated measurement of the human energy balance. And what he found out was that in completely normal people, up to 25% of the energy you cannot explain calorically. So we are not speaking about breatharians here. We are speaking about people like you and me. Mm-hmm. And in this study, he also found out that the less calories we take in, the higher is this unmeasured energy. This energy you cannot explain calorically. And you see this when you do fasting, that in the first few days, you lose a lot of weight, and then the curve is getting flatter and flatter. So it's not like in a car, you know. If you drive for 100 miles, then you will need more fuel. But for some reason, the human body is capable of changing this. And suddenly he needs less calories. But where is the energy coming from? And this is the interesting question now. Where is the energy from? Because the classical idea is that we get all our life energy by burning calories, by oxidation of glucose. And it comes out that this is only a small part of the truth. And this is what I try to tell the people, that we are all living on light to a certain extent. And we are flexible. Probably not all people are able to practice breatharianism and stop eating completely. And actually, I have to admit, of course, I do not know if this is really possible. If Prahlad Jani really didn't eat and drink for 70 years, the only one who knows is he himself. But what these people tell us, and all the studies we have, is that there is so much more possible than we can imagine. And that life energy is a big mystery, and where we get the life energy from is a mystery. And that classical science has no idea about it. Classical science cannot produce one single living cell from dead matter. So life energy is a big mystery. So we can allow ourselves to look into these Eastern medical traditions who tell us more about life energy and what is life energy. And we can allow ourselves to look into fringe parts of science, like the biophoton research. And yeah, we can talk about that later. I'm talking now a lot. Do you have any questions, or should we?
I mean, I'll let Bear jump in here, but we can take this 1,000 different places, because we talk about literally the science that explains why this works all the time here. And Bear, you want to jump in? Let me just say one thing real quick.
Yeah.
With mainstream science, like if you go to Wikipedia and you're just learning about this right now, the way the system's built is, you're exactly right, PA. You're going to be immediately deterred from this, because there's Snopes, poo-pooing these ideas. If you go to Wikipedia, breatharianism is considered a deadly pseudoscience by scientists and medical professionals, and several adherents of these practices have died from starvation or dehydration. It is an established fact that humans require food and water to survive. So what we talk about a lot too is that, the universe is we live in a mental universe where literally the thought forms that we create as consciousness creates the actual physical representation in the simulation. And without getting too off track here, when we as consciousness are ingrained with these ideas, immediately breatharianism goes out the window. So we already have a massive uphill battle, as you say, because science doesn't have the full picture with the way science currently works in the materialistic point of view to even approach this subject appropriately. So then we're forced to go to the mystical sides of the Eastern traditions, which also aren't totally getting the full picture because of their more generic mystical representations of it. So it's up to people like us to take it all together and create the new science that can help explain this and help people open up to these ideas that we are pure consciousness and we can control the physicality through the mental plane. Bear, I'll let you take it from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The mystical side of things that you described, it's only mystical to, I think, the Western mind, because we're using terminologies and metaphors from other cultures in the Eastern part of the world that, had a whole different mindset and belief system, and therefore a whole different experience. So, and also developed certain abilities that are innate in all of us, where they could see things firsthand in a different way that we don't believe exist. And we don't believe that they exist only because we never do the practices in the same way. One thing I'd like to share with you, Peter, is One of the laboratory assessments that I do with clients that, I help out with health conditions, it's called biological ionization analysis. And it was developed by a gentleman by the name of Kerry Reams. Now, Kerry Reams lived in America in the Midwest in the early 1900s. And you could think of him as the Tesla of biology. He was truly one of these rare individuals that come along every few hundred years and really understood on another whole level, but also is very grounded in his background in science. And he started out in soil science, but applied these same principles to human biology. And now people, a handful of us that are aware of these techniques, are still practicing this to analyze people's health. So here's how it goes. We extrapolate elements from laboratory samples from fluids from people's bodies. And without elaborating more on how that's done, what we then do is we take these elements and we can put them in a mathematical computation and then create ratios. And from that, understand the electrical properties that are created in the body by way of the proportion of these elements. Now, what we do, even though we're looking at chemical elements, we understand that it's creating an electrical line of resistance. And what we also understand is when you can get this line of resistance in a body adjusted, and we have techniques to do that, then people regain their health. And a lot of marvelous things happen because we're looking at the body as an electrical electricity rather than chemistry. Now, what Kerry Reams found, and it's what many of us in the field have found also, is that he stated early on that 80% of a person's nutritional needs are derived directly from the atmosphere. And he had ways of explaining on why that was so. Now, when he developed his testing, he found that when he made the adjustments to improve that line of electrical resistance, which means the more you get fine-tuned, then the more that electrical system, is more efficient in providing for your needs, then you need less nutrition. And also what you bring into your body creates less toxic effects and work and so forth. And he further surmised that the 20% of nutrition that people derive from food is actually a very crude way of, in a very toxic way, really, of developing or deriving energy that is then used to jumpstart those mechanisms that allow us to get the final 80%, the majority of our energy needs directly from the atmosphere. And so when you take a person and successfully improve their line of resistance, create that, it's like a 0-point energy effect. The more tuned up you become, then you actually get more efficient at driving direct from the atmosphere with less and less need for food. So that system has been around for decades. A few of us have actually employed it in clinical medicine. It works, and you definitely see greater efficiency in people's physiology and way to derive their needs in the first place. So I wanted to share that with you because that is a real evidence-based system that I think lends credence to Breatharianism and how it's possible for an individual to get to the point where they don't need crude foodstuffs at all. And in fact, we theorize, I haven't seen it myself, I see people regain their health, but we theorize that if a person's line of resistance came to a perfection, and we actually have the numerical numbers as far as what it would require for a person to get in the perfect proportions, where not only would you not age in the traditional way, but you wouldn't need any food for at all. So that's what we, just based on our experience so far and how we see people's health improve. So just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think it's very important to get explanations, because as long as humans, as we don't have some kind of explanation, it's so hard for us to see it, to understand it. I interviewed a scientist and said, what we cannot explain, we cannot see. At least it's this way in science. So if you just have facts, they're just saying it cannot be true, it does not exist. But the good thing is that we have now first explanations. And what you just told me reminds me of a few explanations I got. And one is biophoton research by Fritz Albert Popp. You are familiar with it?
Yes.
So should I talk about it, or is this something?
Oh, absolutely. Whatever you think is relevant, because this is, I think you found out more than anybody else in this field.
So biophotons are actually something that isn't controversial. It's a very weak light radiation we found in all living cells. And when these cells die, this radiation disappears. It's actually the light of life. And Fritz Albert Popp, he's one of the pioneers, and he continued the work of Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich, who gave the name organ for life energy. And you know, Wilhelm Reich, he first his books were burned by the Nazis, then he fled to the United States, and then the Food and Drug Administration burned his books because his ideas were so radical. But what he said was, there has to be some life energy. What is this life energy? And biophoton research is one of these explanations. And so we have in all living cells, we can see these biophotons, and when the cell dies, this light energy disappears. And Fritz Albert Popp says the light is coming basically from the sun. The sun is emitting information. This weak radiation is the carrier of information, of coherence, of coherent information. And this coherent information is stored in plants and then in animals. And when we eat the food, when we eat the plants and the animals, we basically take this light. Fritz Albert Popp is saying, when we look, for example, at the chemical formula of sugar, it's getting transformed into water and carbon dioxide, like the material substances. Both water and carbon dioxide leave the body. What stays is the light. So the light, the information is the important thing. Of course, there are material substances involved and physical processes. But behind these processes, there are information processes, which are important. Because when you look at the living cell, the material substances are not important. What is important is the life energy and the consciousness. Dean Radin from the university, from the Institute
Noetics.
Noetic Sciences says, what is consciousness? Consciousness is an ordering principle. And if this ordering principle leaves the body, it quickly falls apart in its non-interesting material substances. And so what is important is information and order. And it seems that we get this order through light. And there was another eye-opening experience when, in 2013, I got a letter from Professor Gerald Pollack from the University of Washington. Do you know him?
Not sure.
You should get him on the show. He's fantastic.
What is his name again?
Gerald Pollack, Professor Gerald Pollack.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm vaguely aware of his work.
he's a specialist for water, and
yeah.
and he found a force phase of water. So in 2013, I got this mail from him, and he said, "Can I watch your film?" And I sent him the English copy, and he was mesmerized. He said, and then he said to me, "You know, I have an explanation how this works." And
Yeah.
what he found out is that there is a force phase of water beside vapor, liquid, and solid. And this force phase of water is our body water. And it has a different chemical formula. It's not H2O, it's H3O2. So it has an additional how do you call it? O in the air? Oxygen.
Oxygen.
Oxygen. So there is an additional oxygen, and what follows is that it has not only a different chemical formula, but also different physical properties. It's negatively charged, and he says that this force phase of water is able to absorb radiation from the surroundings, and nature is negatively charged. There is, for example, this guy in the States, the earthing pioneer, who says we have to go barefoot because we need to absorb the negative charge of the earth. That there are studies about it.
It's like the negative ions right now with my salt lamp here and flowing water and all that.
Exactly. Negative ions. And this was really a missing link in my whole research, because when I was in, perhaps you remember the interview in China, when I interviewed these Kung Fu masters about Bigu. And this Kung Fu master says, you know, you shouldn't practice Bigu in the cities, because in the cities, the chi fields are not ordered. And you should practice Bigu only where you have ordered chi fields and a lot of negatively charged ions. And when I did the interview, I didn't understand this, because there was this Kung Fu master in the middle of China, and he was talking to me about negatively charged ions. I just didn't get it by then. But with this research of Charles Pollack, finally it made sense, because this was really something all the guys told me when you remember the Alpine yogi. In my film, he says when he's in Vienna, in the city, he needs a liter of soy milk in the evening. But when he is in nature, he can live off air and water and
yeah, that guy's really cool.
Yeah. He's saying this in really simple word, but it's basically the truth that Charles Pollack said, that you need this negatively charged ion. In normal rooms, you have a lot of positive charge. When you get air from the air condition, you have positive charge. So now it made sense why all these studies, when they locked in Hira Ratanmanek for 410 days, he lost 19 kilos. And also Prahladyani lost a little weight. But now it made sense why they underperform in these studies, because they are locked in rooms. They are not in contact with nature. They don't get these charge, and it's like proving how sailing works in an indoor swimming pool. If there is no wind, it just cannot work. So it's a very complex topic, and I think there is electricity, like you already says, there is radiation, there is the sun, but also consciousness. There is inner light and outer light we are living off, because the consciousness topic, we can create order ourselves. The reason why meditation is so powerful, and why most of the people who do Breatharianism in a intensive way, they all had some kind of epiphany, or they do meditation or something, because they create this inner order as well. You can create an inner. It's also called inner light. In India, they have this word Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy is the divine form of prana,
Yep.
the life energy. So there are a lot of clues you need to get this, and that there are still a lot of mysteries. But science has the problem: if they don't have an explanation, the only explanation they have is this has to be a fake, or this is nonsense. And of course, there's a lot of nonsense around, but the topic of Breatharianism, you cannot discuss in black and white. There is not 3 times eating a day and not eating at all. There are thousands of steps in between, and I always try to make people understand that we are all living off light. So it's not about stopping eating, but understanding that consciousness and life energy are the most important elements of our being, because the material processes, yes, they are there, but they are not the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of nature and the qigong master up in the forest pulling the energy literally out of nature with the negative ions. And we can break it down into the more particle based physics and stuff, but also just looking at it in terms of informational fields and pulling those fields out of nature itself, versus in more of a city where we see general health deteriorate when you're in a place full of concrete and lacking clean air and good those negatively charged ions and all that. That's just like common sense too, So when these guys are brought into some sort of case study in a hospital or something, yeah, they're not being able to pull that nutrition out of those nutritional fields, those informational fields, if you will. So of course they need to. It would be great to see someone do a study in their natural place where they're doing this, and I think we would get a lot more out of that. One thing too, quickly here on the inner light, something I've been obsessed with of late, I'm getting back into it, is doing like the out of body experience work and stuff, and getting into the astral plane and all that. And I know that's like way different level, but I'm reading Robert Monroe's book right now, Journeys Out of the Body. And he was fantastic because he was an American who was doing more of a scientific approach and was able to really easily get out of body, and he called it his second body. But they talk about that, how there's like, there's beings that go out in the astral world and pull nutrition out of their inner light that they create with their own consciousness. So that ability to, there's just so much that we're just learning now in terms of where we get this energy from. But in the end, once again, it's all consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a level of waveform physics that was brought forth by a gentleman by the name of Walter Russell and others as well, but he was the best at laying it all out and then demonstrating it technologically and in other ways. And he understood that all of what we consider physical are simply the results of electrical polarization events that emanate directly from intelligent consciousness in the first place. And it's a 2-cycle affair, which we won't get too much into that. But in what we think of as physical, it's one side of the equation where those informational fields, which are actually represent those electrical polarizations, they stratify and then compress into vibrations that then register on our consciousness and create an entire three-dimensional simulation that we call physical. So then he went further and delineated how the entire periodic table of elements are actually different angulations according to on different positions on these waveforms that emanate from these same electrical impulses. And so pretty much proved for those that delve deep enough into his work that there's nothing physical about our universe in the first place. So when we try to break it up into particles, all we're seeing, or materialistic elements, what we're actually doing is just trying to describe what our senses or our technological extensions of our senses are reporting to us, like microscopes and such. But in reality, those two are part of the same electrical polarization events directly from consciousness. So you can't really, you have to take those with a grain of salt too. It's all part of the same three-dimensional representation of pure consciousness. So going a step further, when people get to that level of what we would consider spiritual development, all we're simply doing is seeing through the simulation for what it is and reconciling that part of our mental plane experience that has a strong belief system that we have to consume our environment or do anything physical in the first place in order to survive. And you go into the Shaolin temples and places where they deprogrammed themselves to a substantial amount. They were able to be free of these belief systems that then would necessarily have to register as their experience as far as needing food or needing anything, because they understood that they were co-creators in the process and simply had to project by that direct form of consciousness what they wanted to experience in their body, in their worlds, and needed very little or none at all what we think of as physical to sustain ourselves. When I was watching your video, it struck me right away when I saw some of the test subjects in hospital rooms before, and I was glad that they came to the same conclusion, but it immediately hit me. It's, well, of course there's going to be variations. You're in a closed up room. You're cut off from nature. How can it possibly duplicate somebody who's living a natural, authentic lifestyle and deriving, directly from energy when you're cut off from it? And there's another gentleman I just want to mention real quick, and I want to let you take over. His name is Ernst Lecker, and he was an Austrian physicist. Have you ever heard of him?
How is he called?
Ernst, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, Ernst Lecker, L-E-C-H-E-R.
Interesting. No, Ernst Lacher.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So he was an engineer, and he developed an instrument. It's a dual impedance instrument, and we just call it the Lecker instrument.
Yeah.
And what it is, and in fact, I can show it to you because I use it every day in medicine and also with soil science, and because you can read those energies that emanate from from nature, and because it mimics nature's normal way of receiving and transmitting information. For instance, we have DNA in our bodies. All living things do, plants do. And DNA is a dual strand just like this. Now, that what he developed was the ability to have a slide that then picks up these energies directly from the atmosphere, no different than what Tesla was doing when he was able to derive energy directly without any electronics or any other means. So when you're talking about earthing and that sort of thing, what we do is, for instance, if I want to see if a person is receiving proper grounding energy from the bottom up, then I set this to 8 because we know that represents that level of energy coming from the earth. And then I can also see if an individual is receiving, what we would think more energy from the atmosphere or the cosmos, whatever. And then that would be set on 12. And then we'd further have a lot of other computations. And there's many, almost infinite number of numbers and gradations in between. And then we can see if both energies are meeting in this person in a balanced way. We can also then test the energies. That's like the north-south pole, and you'd have to default back to Walter Russell and his understanding of waveform mechanics, because everything is actually an electrical wave. And then we also understand there's other phenomena that are not just the north-south pole that's created by the ground influence and the atmosphere above, but there's also an east-west polarity, and that represents other forces that are way too much for this discussion. And then we measure those, and we can see, therefore, if in a person the polarities coming from east, west, north, south are symmetrical. And when they're not, then we can determine the reasons why that's so. Then we can make adjustments with the modalities that we employ in medicine and our type of medicine, and bring, a symmetry back into that individual, and also help them be more efficient in receiving those energies from all those different angles. And go ahead.
What is the instrument measuring?
It's measuring the finer impulses that what you mentioned in earthing, for instance. Those are energies that are of a much more subtle and refined level than, say, what's coming out of our wall sockets for electricity. Unfortunately, our electronics and a lot of instrumentation that's designed to read energy fields, even in holistic medicine. I used to use a lot of instruments from Germany, but they were, interfacing with some form of electronics or computer software, which would override a lot of these finer impulses. So you'd get kind of an extrapolated reading of sort of what was going on, but it didn't have the ability to directly receive these impulses that are literally surrounding and animating our whole experience in the first place. So there's really not a name for those energies other than it's what Ernst Lecker understood to develop the instrument. It's what Tesla understood. It's what Walter Russell understood. And he was a contemporary of Tesla, and, they had a lot of communication back and forth. So this is a well-known phenomena, and I think it's, of course, not in the mainstream, because it would really create a wrinkle in a lot of vested interest, in medicine and engineering that don't want the more advanced technologies to exist, because it would be bad for business. It would also be bad for people that like to control other people, because if we really understood what people in the other world knew, that we have more of a role in our own life process and we were ever led to believe, then we would be less dependent on them. We would be harder to control. So that's in fact why a lot of these simple technologies have not come to light. But I just thought it was really directly involved with our discussion, and how something like breatharianism is actually possible. And the things that you're discussing in your video and our whole discussion here is based on a lot of, again, what Michael said initially, mystical concepts like prana and terminologies from other cultures. But the fact is those are real. We can measure them, and we can also intervene in ways to manipulate or make modifications in an individual or in plant life for farming, and get much better results.
And you notice too, that's an analog instrument, not digital. And so it's that's what's so special about it too, is as Bear said, it's not getting a reading like through a computer where you're getting a representation with zeros and ones. You're getting the real actual data. And that's something that we talk about too, getting back to analog and away from digital, because that's the true nature of reality.
Cool. And what throws people about, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
I'm looking forward to do research on that. That's really interesting because I
Okay.
never heard of this.
A fellow countryman too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, what throws people about this is it's so simple, and it does require an interface of a person that has to develop a feel and understand what it's doing and how to use it. So it's more of a technology that requires a conscious communication between the practitioner and the instrument itself. But you have to understand also this is not a plaything or make-believe, because to this day it's used in fields of engineering, where people will use this where they plan to build a skyscraper or a bridge, and to read the ley lines in the land and other conditions that would allow them to understand if it was a favorable location to build things. There's an institute in Paris where some French scientists and medics have adapted it to, and these are medical doctors, where they adapted it to biological evaluation and for medicine and the individual. And the Paris Institute was awarded the highest honor of French science for innovation, and pushing science to the next level. So these are real things, and they should be discussions, that everybody should be aware of. And I just think, really would help people believe that something like breatharianism is possible. And like you say, it's not about eating or not eating food. It's just understanding the nature of our true selves.
Yeah, consciousness. That's
Yes.
really the point. I got awarded the prize for biggest nonsense of the year 2011 from the Skeptic Society in Austria and Germany, and that was what I told them. This film is not about eating or not eating. It's about questioning the materialistic beliefs. This system they believe is the truth and nothing but the truth. And I said, but I'm not the only one questioning this belief system, because the founder of modern physics did it, Max Planck. And
Yes.
and I finished with the famous quote of Max Planck, and that's the bridge to what you said before. Max Planck said, as a scientist who was dealing his whole life with the research on matter, he can say as much about matter, that matter as such does not exist. Behind matter, there is a conscious mind, and this mind is the matrix of all matter. Because what we find is that this idea of little balls spinning around and making up matter, it's an outdated idea. It was until I did research for in the beginning there was light, that I found out that the atom model of Niels Bohr that we find in all school books is outdated since 1926. This idea of little balls that are electrons spinning around protons and neutrons, it's an outdated idea, because matter is actually vibrating energy. And I interviewed Amit Goswami, the quantum physicist, as well, and he said this, what you said before: the solidity of matter is an illusion of our senses. And I think this is a wonderful bridge to Indian philosophy, which says that the material creation is Maya, the big illusion, and that the big illusion is so big and so strong because we connect via our senses with it, and the reason why yogis want to withdraw their senses is because then they can look behind the Maya, the big illusion. But when you understand that matter is vibrating energy, then suddenly all these supernatural phenomena suddenly get more conceivable, going through a wall, for example. I mean, I never did it, but there is a lot of interesting evidence. And Amit Goswami says there is supernatural phenomena fulfill all criteria, all scientific criteria. The only scientific criteria they do not fulfill is replicability. Is that, did I say it correct? Yeah. Because, but when you go into quantum physics, there is nothing like replicability. And uranium atom never decays the same way twice. In quantum physics, there is only probability, how it probably will happen, but it can be completely different. And I think this idea of an objective reality is also an idea that gets outdated more and more. It's like an idea from the 17th century, like this idea that we are combustion engines. And the good thing is that science brings us more and more evidence that these old ideas are just outdated. They were useful 300 years ago, but now we need new ideas. And I always say the most important thing is our own experience. And if I experience something, this is the most important thing, no matter if science is telling me this is possible or not. It's just a story.
And consciousness creates moment by moment representations of what those thoughts are, polarizing into electrical events. And it's a dual electrical hydraulic pump, so to speak, where on one side we're compressing informational fields into those vibrations that register to our senses, and simultaneously those informational fields are radiating. So it's literally a hydraulic pump that goes in both directions simultaneously. The Shen masters would understand that. The rest of us are hypnotized into the compression side, which allows us to only experience the compressed data in its crude vibrations that do register to our senses. And also those informational fields compress in a stratified fashion, which gives incremental effects, which then we experience as time. So a Shen master who sees through all that becomes the director, writer, and producer of their own movie moment by moment. So if a Shen master walks through a wall, they're not walking through a wall because they know the wall's not there in the first place. They know they aren't there in the first place, but observers are going to see them project the next frame of their experience on the other side of the wall, so it looks like they're walking through a wall. Yeah. So meanwhile, those of us that are, caught up in, what we term as the superstition of materialism are trying to, scratch our heads, say, how the heck do you walk through something solid? Well, it's not solid. It's not there the way we think it is in the first place. And one last comment about food. The reason why food is I love food. I'm Italian, and I still eat and all that sort of thing. I do practice regular fasting and love it. But, again, the name of the game isn't trying to be a breatharian or trying to be anything else. It's just having the experience that we need for our own evolution. But food, when you think about it in terms of our discussion of just the electrical effects of creation, when you kill an animal or even kill a plant for that matter, now that plant or that living thing is now cut off from the very force that animated it into the simulation in the first place. So when we eat it, we're eating the after effects, the residual vibrations, but it's no longer part of the source that was making it grow and thrive in the first place. And of course, the moral of the story is if we could somehow tap into that energy that was animating the animal in the first place, rather than eating the dead carcass or the dead plant, we do much better. And plants, of course, we found that when we eat them in their alive form, very quickly after we pick them. So there's still more life force, and there's definitely going to be more life force than there is in dead flesh. And I'm not saying anybody has to be a vegetarian or anything, but it's just a fact that there's more life force in a freshly picked plant. And that's why people have found that live food diets seem to really improve their health, because they're getting more of that residual energy or prana, whatever you want to think about it, than if you're eating overly cooked foods or an abundance of flesh foods.
Absolutely. Not Sineda Baranova, but there is a Russian author. She wrote a book, We Eat Ourselves to Death. And she says exactly that, this idea of calories again is wrong, because if you eat fresh food, then you need very little energy and thrive. And so it's not a question of calories, but how much energy is in the food. And it has a lot to do again with life energy. If it's fresh, and then there is a lot of life energy in it. And I absolutely agree with you that it's not good to have ideology. You have to be vegan or anything, because we have different level of consciousness. And I also want to warn to try, for example, Breatharianism, because then I'm more spiritual or anything, because then it's just a matter of the ego, and then it really can be dangerous. So in my film, also this Pigou master says that if you just try to do this because you heard that somebody else is doing it, then it can be really dangerous. And spiritual ambition is a dangerous thing. But if it happens as a byproduct, naturally, wonderful. I think that's the best diet for yourself and the surrounding you can have, because that's the most direct. If you're connected to the source and live off the source, I mean, that's the best you can do.
Yeah. And imagine all the time it'll free you up when you're not so focused on worrying about food all the time. You when your show, did you have Jaz Muheen, correct? Was she featured in the documentary? She's a notable, and so she's the person who's been really pushing the 21 days to breatharianism. And there were some people that, I don't know if it was directly because of her, but there were some people that died, correct, from trying to follow that?
Because of her, of course, but there were a few people who died. And of course, this can be dangerous. If you force yourself to stop eating, you probably will die, because you have to listen to your body and be very, very careful with it. And I think it's of course it's a matter of freedom, but you can experience that also in fasting, for example, and play with yourself, like also with intermittent fasting, that you just experience the freedom from food, not in an extreme way, but like in a day-to-day basis. And see, I don't have to eat 3 times a day. It's enough if I eat once, for example, and I still have enough energy, and I still don't lose weight. Because if you lose weight, if you lose energy, if you get sick, please start eating. Please start drinking. Because
it's like it's like anything with developing your consciousness. If you're coming from a place, like for me, I'm getting into ultra trail running right now. Well, not so much ultra, but trail running. And I see these guys running these 100-mile ultra trails. That'd be like if I decided to just jump in and do 100-mile, I might die. I mean, those are the extremes, and they're powerful. It's a powerful narrative because it shows the power of the human will and the power of the human mentality, that we can pretty much do anything if we put our mind to it. But just like the fractal nature of the universe, you can't just immediately do it. You have to go through the analog, increments of growth to get to that point. So just jumping into a 21-day no food, no water without having, sure, you're right. Some people could do that because they've developed the consciousness and the means already without in their day-to-day lives to do that. But if you're just an average Joe living on McDonald's and watching, sports and doing that thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're on that level of consciousness and all of a sudden you have an awakening and you go, I want to become a breatharian, and just jump right into not eating or drinking, you're probably going to have some challenges. So yeah, I mean, that was my point of bringing that up, is that obviously with the way media works these days and how they just jump onto these black and white notions of, of covering a story, they're going to, of course, jump on like, this person died, breatharianism is dangerous, because they don't understand the nuance of the reality that we live in. That, everything's got to be so black and white these days. And so, look back to the great story of the Garden of Eden, right? Originally, if you look at that story, man was in Gaia here, which is the garden planet. Man and woman wasn't eating. It wasn't until the apple that led to the fall, and they were just existing in pure energy and pure love. And then it was eating the apple that was brought by the snake, and we know that whole story. So we've been told this through eons that, the true nature of our existence is pure energy, pure light, pure love. And as we fell and became, that falling isn't necessarily a moral thing or anything. It just has to do with reality. The reality of the density of our physical expression currently is that, biologically, we have developed these mechanisms to have this experience by digesting food and all that. This does lead to one of the questions that I had and Matthew had in the chat, and something, as I follow a breatharian here in the States, I don't know if you know of him, Elatom Elamine.
Oh, I love him. I love Elatom.
Okay.
I met him at the Pranic Festival. He's such a great guy. I love Elatom.
Interesting. We're trying to get him on the show, actually. That was actually a question I have. So you've met in person a real breatharian. What was your feeling from meeting him? Did he seem legit, just from your own personal feeling, from your intuition from meeting someone like him?
I just can say I really loved being around him. I slept the next room to him, and I thought he's a really nice guy. And what was also interesting, by then I did an interview with him, and he was speaking about celibacy, and I thought this is because
celibacy.
How do you pronounce it?
Celibacy. So in other words, refraining from sexual interaction, or
because he's doing that. And normally when you think about celibacy, you always think, oh, that's horrible, and the priests and they are cutting them away from life and so. And it was so funny when I interviewed Elatom about celibacy, because he said, it's so great, and he doesn't have problems with women anymore, and it's fantastic, and he's so free. And so it's the same with food, actually, because if you are in a state of mind when you say, okay, food is the biggest pleasure I have in life, or sex is the biggest pleasure I have in life. Of course, then it's horrible if you don't get it. But if you make yourself free from it, then it's wonderful, because you lose a lot of dependencies. You gain a lot of time. All the breatharians, they most of the time they sleep very little. So they gain a lot of time. And I just can say that I spent, I think, 2 or 3 days with Elatom, and I really loved being around him.
Cool. Yeah. So I follow him, and he's had some controversy of late with women. Actually, I don't want to get into it, and I don't know. I don't pay attention to that. But
what did he say?
Oh, there's been some controversy with women coming out recently. One of them in LA who said that he attacked her and he's a sexual predator.
Really?
Yeah. So with these types, these guru types, you see that a lot, and it's another question of humanity and stuff. And
that happens a lot. That's like
the famous guy in LA who was doing the hot yoga.
Whenever a guru appears, soon some students, I think they attract each other, gurus and people who are misused by gurus. I don't know if Alitom has to do anything with that, but
Yep.
you see it in all religions and ashrams and
the cult of personality.
Yeah, gurus are humans, and
so that tells us what the parable of the apple and Adam and Eve in the garden was really about, huh? But anyway, just go ahead.
There is this saying, and this was something I didn't experience this with Elitom, but with other people, that Hildegard von Bingen says that fasting is nearly making all parts of the human character better. There is only one thing that deteriorates, and that is the hybris, the ego. And that is really something I experienced with a lot of people which are into Breatharianism, and that they get a very big ego. And I don't want to get into details. And
well, actually, it's like Bikram, the famous. I was remembering Bikram. The famous yogi who came to LA in the 70s or 60s and invented this whole story about himself with was it Nixon, and now they're saying that's not true. And there's a documentary that recently came out, and he was a sexual predator. I mean, it's pretty much been proven now, and he's been on the go. So I think you're right. No matter what, there's a human psychological part in this matrix that we're in, and that when our culture elevates people to these like almost godlike positions, oftentimes they're human, and they the sexuality thing is a powerful universal force, is sexuality. And reading this book about out-of-body experiences, it's interesting. He talks about how when you go to the astral plane, the first level that you have to get through is all these souls that are there that are kind of like lost, and it's all sexual. And so he has to break through that, and there's like all the male, masculine, feminine, whatever energies coming at him, all sexual. And then once you break through that, you get through that, and then you get more of the elevated consciousness. So I think sexual and the whole idea of celibacy does make a lot of sense, because we know, like for men especially, you lose a lot of your energy and power when you ejaculate. And there's a whole tradition of not ejaculating with the tantric.
But
so
do you know more about it? Because this is really something I tried to do a documentary about sexuality, but I finally didn't do it, and that was the reason why I interviewed Alitom. But the reason why I didn't do it, because I didn't came to a point where I started understanding. Because exactly this is the point. Now, is it helpful to not ejaculate, or do you cut off yourself from the life force? I have no idea.
I think it's there's techniques, and not just tantric, but when I was back learning martial arts long ago, I ran into this guy from Thailand. His name was Mantak Chia, before he got really well known, and I thought I was going to be learning some martial arts techniques, but he taught me what's called the microcosmic orbit, and then how to apply that to sexual energy. So just like eating, you don't want to just stop eating. You might want to take up intermittent fasting, things like that, which are good tools to kind of find yourself and just go along with your own process and not try to be anywhere, that's radical and extraordinary for yourself. So with the practice of circulating your sexual energy, you're not being celibate. But when you are having sex, what you do then is you understand how in a meditative process, even when you're with a partner, to bring the energy up through the spine, in Oriental medicine, the back channels, the governing vessel, and then up, then down the conception vessel, and then circulate it. Then you can get really fancy and start circulating it to your limbs. They call that the extended cycle. Then you can do the heavenly cycle, which now you're projecting that energy when it gets to the top of your head, into your higher electronic body, and then mingling it there and bringing it. So basically you have something where you're using sex as a vehicle in order to experience that energy in other ways than just building up the pressure in your pelvic area where it's going to have to explode sooner or later. And the neat thing about it is you get less attached with practice of having to expel the energy that way. And you also learn that it feels kind of neat to have that energy, when it's in different parts of your body and consciousness, and how to mingle it with your partner and circulate each other's energy through your your energy systems, because you can do that consciously with a partner that's also trained in it. So you could think of that as intermittent fasting for sex, and for males especially who do lose a lot of life force every time they emit fluids. It's a good way to just really have a firsthand experience as far as how that energy feels when it's circulating in your whole body, and gradually you kind of you don't become non-sexual, not at all, because sexual energy is the most primal force in the universe. And even Walter Russell in his physics talks about how every thought form creates a polarization, which is then constantly trying to unify with the opposite polarity to find balance. And so sex is a wonderful vehicle. We just have attachments about it like food. I think it's just a matter of learning different ways to use it, lose the attachments, and use it, to further our understanding about everything. Just for the average guy, just stopping having sex, guaranteed it's you're going to have some blowback eventually. Yeah, it's going to come back on you. And if you're just celibate and you're being a guru, and then you have some little young honey, throw herself at you, you're gonna find out real quick, if you have any attachments left. Yeah.
And do you know about studies about life energy, or how the energy in the body develops with ejaculation and non-ejaculation? Because I found nothing about it. I just know about the ideas of Tantra and so on, but I didn't find out about any scientific studies about this topic.
Yeah, my experience is confined to the martial arts world. Now, they would argue strenuously that Tantra can have inherent dangers, because what you're doing is simply elevating the energy up the mainline channels exclusively to your head. And that can create some issues in your health, in your psychology, and, you may not be ready for that. However, the microcosmic orbit, what you're doing is you're circulating into a complete circuit and then ending back into what we in martial arts call the dantian, which is, a little bit, kind of in the middle of your body, right below the belly button. And in martial arts, you want to cultivate that energy, because that becomes your center of power, that not only do you physically move around that little center of power, but it's also you drive the energy you need to do things that would be considered phenomenal for the average person that's never built up that energy. So now the sexual energy, you always bring it, around full circle, and then build your reservoir in the Dantian area. So you're not just exclusively bringing the energy into the upper centers that might blow out, the areas in the pineal and the crown chakra, if you're not ready to go there. So the microcosmic orbit, I think, just from experience and from the explanations I got from the start, are very, very much safer, more practical, and I think have a much higher degree of success in many ways.
So this is really interesting. But I actually had the problem that there are a lot of concepts in Eastern traditions, but I didn't find any scientific clues about this. The only thing you hear, it's good to ejaculate a lot because it's cleaning the body. That's the only thing I found from Western science. So
yeah, and
well,
just consider that with every time you emit fluid, how many, I mean, if each one of those little creatures in there were to find a hospitable place, you could populate the planet, many times over with one ejaculation. Just think about it logically. That's a lot of energy.
Well, there's also a lot
And
of, isn't there also a lot of nutrients and stuff that are hard to get? Is it selenium? Or I know there's some things that are in male ejaculate that are not so easy to replenish.
this would be an interesting topic. I mean, of course, you could say, if you get a lot of energy, if you eat a lot of energy, it's no problem, and it's like a circle, and you get a lot in and get a lot out, and it's circulating. But I really don't know. This would be an interesting topic. So if you get an expert on this, I will watch this show for sure.
Yeah,
But
the other thing.
I did quite a lot of interviews about this, but I never came to a place where I really understood it and where I could say, now I understand it, and it's not just ideology. There's facts, but to make the circle complete, when I interviewed Alitom, what I found interesting is that he really enjoyed it. And I didn't feel it was just with the priests, just an ideology, and they get frustrated or stuck in something, but he really enjoyed it. But it can be that, yeah, if you are if you build up a lot of energy and you're around women, somebody happens. I don't know. I just can't. I just can tell. When I was with Alitom, I really thought he's not this guru type with a big ego, but he really was grounded and very nice and funny. That was my experience with him.
So to switch into one last topic, I'd like to hear your comments about years ago, I did the whole sun gazing process, and I went through the 44-day cycle where you build up, and at the end, you're actually staring into the sun, without interruption for 44 minutes. And I found that, yeah, in fact, you can do that. You don't destroy your eyes. Actually, my eyesight improved. I threw away my glasses, and of course, the whole understanding is that you're absorbing nutrition directly from the sun, and I know you covered that in your video. So anything you can share with us about that?
I think that there are, I mean, when Hiratan Manik says that it's also important that you do walking barefoot. So you get, I mean, at first it's just an open eye meditation, and the sun is like the best meditation object you can imagine. And of course, there's coming energy. There was a study in 2014 showing that the mitochondria in the cells are able to produce usable energy from the body through photons. So there is actually something like human photosynthesis.
Correct.
And yeah, this makes perfectly sense. I mean, if you are in the sun, you get nourished. And in addition, you pull up inner light by doing this open eye meditation. And here Atan Manik also says walking barefoot is important. That is addressing this idea of getting negatively charged ions from the earth. So for me, it makes sense.
Well, mainstream science will say sun gazing will ruin your eyes. The radiation and stuff will damage your eyes.
Important to say that you only should do sun gazing when with sunset. When in here Atan Manik says in the safe hours. So 1 hour after the sun goes up and 1 hour before the sun goes down. So whenever I did it, it was directly above the horizon. So
yeah,
there happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. What, Bear, I know you have an experience doing that.
Yeah, I was taught, and also I say with my own experience, when you gaze at sunset, it's a different effect. It's more of a out-of-body meditation, so to speak, whereas at sunrise, it's more nutritive. You just feel like you're absorbing more. And it makes sense because, you know, the rising sun versus the setting sun is a whole different energetic event. I got to the point where I could actually do it at high noon. And, you know, of course, it's important to kind of squint a little bit, but, you know, still, I wouldn't advise anybody to do that, but I tend to use myself as a guinea pig, and I found, you know, no problem with it. But it was only after I built up to it. And that, again, gives you an entirely different energetic effect, you know, which is very, very powerful. But again, something I wouldn't recommend unless you've really built it up and you know what you're doing.
And how's your eyesight?
Well, I used to, it was never horrible, but I used to wear glasses and I don't anymore. So my eyesight's, I'm 70 and my eyesight's better now than when I was 20. Cause you know, when I was playing baseball, I used to have to wear glasses.
Wow. And sun gazing made it better.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It was improving little by little over the years, and then that experience just put it over the top where, you know, I can see fine at a distance. I can read fine without, you know, reading glasses.
Wow, that's
yeah.
really cool. So yeah, I think it's a wonderful meditation. I mean, in Austria we have the problems that often you just don't see the sun, so it makes it more difficult. But that's really something I recommend everybody, that we don't get a lot of sunlight, a lot of daylight in our modern life. And I mean, there was the Nobel Prize 2017 addressing the circadian rhythms, saying also how important it is that we get a lot of daylight during the day, because then serotonin is produced, and when you have enough serotonin you are happy, and serotonin produces melatonin, then you have a good night's sleep. So this is very important. And going to the woods, so and both, when you are looking at the sun, you can do wonderful meditations, and then the woods as well. And this connection to nature is so important. And in one of my or our books, actually, because I wrote it with colleagues, we have these sayings. There are 3 reasons why we are so unhappy in these days, mankind, because we are getting disconnected from ourselves, we are getting disconnected from nature, and we're getting disconnected from our fellow man. And if we get these connections, it's good for us and it's good for the whole mankind.
Definitely.
And, you know, Walter Russell had a great way explaining of how the sun, all the suns and, you know, throughout the cosmos actually birth the planets, and he explained the physics behind it and how that happens. So the sun has all the informational fields, like the DNA for every single planet that it creates. So we think, oh, the sun's good for us because, you know, it stimulates vitamin D production, or we got some photons that, you know, ultraviolet rays and things that are healthy in certain ways. But what we're really doing is absorbing the patterns, the informational fields for all of nature, and those waveforms, those informational fields, which is saying the same exact thing, then, you know, we absorb those just like eating a piece of food, and it repatterns us to reconform, we'll say, to nature's original patterns before we created all of the stuff that we overlay the natural patterns with that creates all of our problems.
Yeah, it's not just vitamin. That's one thing I've been telling people with the whole coronavirus scare is that, you know, go out and get lots of sun. It helps your immune system. It helps your vitality. And it's not just, and a lot of people are saying that, but a lot of people just relate it to vitamin D, and it's this reductionist materialism. Once again, it's much more than vitamin D. It is, you know, and
information. It's the coherent energy. I mean, coherence is like harmony. We are getting all the harmony we need that makes life from the sun.
Exactly. We have someone in chat going, please, people, do never look directly at the sun without proper protection. You know, this is the indoctrination, as these amateur astronomers telling us right now. And it's then how does Dr. Lando have better eyesight from doing sun gazing for decades? Come on, people. I mean, think bigger here, please. So anyways, you know, one question I have, and you seeing Elatom in person and stuff, this is something that, you know, I'm trying to figure out, because we know as people that eat and drink, we have a digestive system, we have a colon, we have, you know, all these apparatus in our body that deal with the aspect of eating and excreting and everything. So when those organs aren't being used because someone who is living off prana, I would love to know more about what happens. Do they atrophy, or like what happens to these organs as you're not using them anymore? Have you had any insight on that?
We know, for example, from Prahlad, because they looked at all his organs and they seemed to work completely normal. In the case of Prahlad, it was the way that they saw in the bladder appearing liquids, and it was reabsorbed from the bladder. So they monitored it all the time, and this is what they saw.
Interesting.
And there's some schools of thought. Go ahead, Peter.
Most breatharians, they drink, and they drink often juices. So there are very little cases I know who really don't eat and drink nothing at all, who claim this. Most of the so-called breatharians, they have a calorie intake of 200, 300, 400 calories a day. And this is actually the amount of calories that this Russian doctor says we need. She says we need 500 calories a day, and everything else is too much.
Well, we know there's an epidemic of overeating.
Form of ideology, but it addresses this calorie myth. You know, because calorie is not the same as a calorie. You know, an apple can have the same amount of calories as a glass of Coca-Cola, but there are completely different nutritional values in it. So the calorie is just the wrong measurement for the nutritional quality of food.
Yeah. One other thing too,
there's also literature. Sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
No. I was going to take it to another thing, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment that there's literature from different cultures that dates way back where they suggest that organs like the liver are a de-evolutionary appendage that was developed as we kind of fell, so to speak, because at one time, the human organism did not need a filtration mechanism or an organ, or, you know, have the need for the other things the liver does, which is manufacture certain nutrients and, you know, conjugate glycogen and things like that, because we were originally designed to live on pure energy, prana. And as we kind of fell in consciousness and, you know, ate that apple, you know, we started necessarily developing, you know, these organ systems and everything to accommodate where we're at. So interesting idea. I kind of trust some of those sources where that comes from, but just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, because of course, living on prana is the purest form of food, and then you don't need no filtration.
Yeah. And something else I was going to ask, and now I kind of lost my train of thought here, but in terms of you know, dealing with the breatharian notion of the physicality, in your studies, have you, you know, how many breatharians have you actually met in person besides Elatom? And I'm just trying to get a notion of like their energetic vibrance, because with the Russian, there was a Russian scientist that you had on your on the documentary that they were showing those, what are those fields?
GDV. Oh yeah, GDV is fantastic. I interviewed Dr. Kordakov again this September, and it's really interesting. GDV works with the Kilian effect, but the Kilian effect normally we know from esoteric fairs, but it combines the Kilian effect with a system of meridians and all that stuff, and they produce a digital picture of your life energy. And what was so interesting for me, because I made an interview with this Russian woman who claims that she didn't eat and drink for many years, and I asked her, did you make any scientific studies, or did you see doctors and so on? And she said no, she just went to this doctor who works with GDV, with the Kilian effect. And so I said, okay, let's go there. I want to see that. And what was interesting for me is that in Russia, they use this GDV technique not in an esoteric relationship, but it was in a normal polyclinic, because they use it to see if the body works well. Because you see problems in the energetic field, and you see, for example, over there are problems with the kidneys, and if you don't do anything, then this problem in the energy will manifest in the physical body. And this is a very interesting way to look at medicine, that you prevent the problem from happening. So you are not, you do not have to cure the problem in the physical body, but you first look at the energy field before it manifests physically. So this was first interesting to see. So I went there with this woman, and they made a GDV picture, and she had a perfectly rounded energy field. It was perfect. And I was filming there. I was alone. I had all the sound equipment and the camera, and it was really stressful. And so between filming, the doctor said or asked me if I also want to make one of these GDV pictures. And so I put my fingers there, and I got my energy field, and it looked horrible. There were holes everywhere, and it was completely messed up. And I was, by then, I have to say, I do meditation now for 20 years, twice a day. And I was speaking with him about meditation, and he said, okay, you could meditate for a minute and do it again. So I sat there and did a 1 minute meditation, and then I did it again, this picture. And the interesting thing was that through this 1 minute meditation, my energy field built up again. So this was very interesting for me to see. And
Hmm.
it showed me first that GDV works, and second, that meditation works. And that through meditation, we absorb order. And all the disorder we create because we are in stress. And I look at all the electronic stuff, if it works, and all the stress is at the right angle and the right picture and that stuff. It creates disorder. But when you sit down and meditate, suddenly in a minute, it's all in order again. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I meditate twice a day.
Amazing. Yeah,
Get
and yeah, that. So how do you pronounce that technology again?
GDV.
GDV.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're literally like taking a picture of the chi.
No, it's like the chi like George.
Oh, G.
V like Dora,
Okay.
and V like
GDV.
Victor.
GDV.
And
Okay.
So is this
Dr. Korotkov.
is this different than Kirlian photography?
Yeah, it's different. It uses the Kirlian effect with the finger, but Dr. Korotkov he created a system how to make a digital picture of the human energy field. He actually worked for the Russian government, and they used it, for example, on all the Olympics sportsmen in Russia, because they had so good experiences. Because you really see when there are problems in certain parts of the body before they actually happen. So that's a really interesting technology. When I met him in September again, we did, for example, he showed us what cell phones create in our energy field, and how they bring disorder in the energy field. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's important. That's, something that can help people that are a little bit more hesitant to jump into this stuff. To start, this is what we're all about here on this channel, is merging, these new sciences with the mysticism, because that is where we need to go as we move towards this understanding of where really what reality is. I'm under the belief that we're going to have some sort of event or some sort of mass consciousness movement to where we all evolve towards a higher understanding. I mean, it has to happen. Otherwise, the world's just not going the right direction. And the polarities are becoming more extreme, as we're seeing everywhere. So this is cool. I'm going to investigate this more, because I love that part of your documentary when they got into that, because it gives you like a visual representation that you can see the direct effects, like you said, of like even meditating. But we're coming up on 2 hours already, guys. It's been I could talk about this for days. It's one of my favorite topics, and PA, we're going to probably have to have you back on and talk more about all sorts of fun things, because you're so insightful, and with all your research and your travels, I mean, you bring to the table so many different concepts. It's really cool. I mean, we didn't even really get into, you were able to go to Northern California here and to the Noetic Institute, right? And
that was great with Dean Radin and seeing the research about telepathy. And I didn't even speak about, there's a big part in my documentary that, or what I filmed, what isn't in the documentary because it was too far out there. It was the supernormal studies of the Chinese military. They had in the 1980s and beginning of the 90s, they had a huge program researching talented kids and Qigong masters doing teleportation and telekinesis, and it's incredible. When I first heard that, I thought this is like X-Men, they were collecting all these super talented kids from all over China, and doing research with them, and I had the chance to interview a few professors and scientists who did this, and they showed me material, and it's just incredible. But it was so far out. We had this in the first cut of the movie, and we did test screenings, and it was just too much, because people said, you nearly had me believe in Breatharianism, and now you're coming up with teleportation.
Indigo children, super soldiers.
Yeah, too much, hold on. So we cut all the stuff out, but it's really interesting.
I love it. I am so fascinated with parapsychology and everything, like with the staring at goats, movie that the CIA or whatever was doing with remote viewing. I mean, it makes sense. It all is something I've been really into for years.
Who was the real guy behind staring at goats, because it was funny when you look at the movie, you think, the script authors, their fantasy went wild, but it all happened. It's it's incredible.
And it all works. I mean, that stuff's real. And yeah, we'll have to have you back on. Do you have any are you working on any current projects, or what are you up to right now?
At the moment, I'm writing books, because as I said, intermittent fasting went through the roof. And I remember when I did in the 2000 years, when I did interviews about fasting, all the doctors said, fasting is useless or dangerous. And then the Nobel Prize 2016 came up, telling us, fasting creates autophagy, and it's the best thing you can do for your body. And suddenly everybody knew it. And when we published the book, as I told, it was the most successful book of the year in Austria.
Wow. So what was that book? What's it titled? Is there an English version?
We just made a translation, but it's still not published. The translated title, in German, it's Jungbrunnen effect. It's the fountain of youth effect, how 16 hours of fasting change your life. Because they found out when you do fasting that your cells age 1/3 slower than when you do not fasting. And you don't get Alzheimer and cancer and all that stuff.
Yep.
So this is really now something where people are open, because there is a Nobel Prize for it. And that's like when 200 years ago or 300 years ago, the Pope said it's good, then it's good. And
I know, right? We did so people that are listening too, that we did a whole show, a whole Alpha Cast with Dr. Lando on fasting and different modalities, from intermittent to longer stretches to something I do. I'm kind of a 1 meal a day guy now.
Yeah.
And and my energy's off the hook. So it's becoming a massive trend here in the States. You're seeing it with millennials, with YouTube channels all focused on it, and people doing fasting challenges and stuff. And just like the breatharian thing, of course, you don't just jump into it. There's a degree of understanding with anything like this, developing your consciousness around it, but powerful modalities. And that's cool. I can't wait to see your book get translated, or if it is already, get published, so that we can share it with our community, because we talk about fasting a lot. So are you looking to get into filmmaking, any more films down the line?
At the moment, not. We start our third book now, because filmmaking is really something that needs so much energy, and like writing a book is like a recreational activity compared to filmmaking. Because there are so many problems when I think back about making this movie. It was so exhausting, and now I have 2 kids. You saw it. I just don't have time for this.
It's
traveling the world. I went around the globes, like, I don't know, for 5 times. And
well, you did it right. I mean, you actually went to the places in person, and you didn't take any shortcuts. I mean, that was like a high budget film that you did. And I agree, as someone who used to work in Hollywood, it's a very physical and tiring process. And nowadays, where anybody can make a film, and the distribution channels are kind of crazy, and there's not as much money in it, it is more difficult. So books do make a lot of sense as long as you're getting the information out there, because you're really great at it. So we thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fantastic talk. Bear, any parting words for our audience or for Peter here?
No, just I really enjoyed this, Peter, and thanks again so much for being with us. You're great, and I look forward to keeping tabs and maybe having another chat someday. And look forward to your future work.
Thanks so much. It was a big pleasure, and I love talking with you. And I learned a lot of things. I can do research now about the Lache guy. And I hope you will do a show on sexuality. I will watch this one for sure.
Yeah, definitely. We also want to do a show on Wilhelm Reich, because we just did one on Royal Reif, who is a very similar character, if you're familiar with him, in the United States, and many similar technologies and understanding of microbiology in terms of pleomorphism and all these things we talk about all the time, bioterrain medicine and understanding the energetics of all this stuff. So Wilhelm Reich is someone that I love, and I love his story, and the orgonite stuff is huge here. We're trying to do this every week and bring this knowledge to to the world, and as you are, and I felt like we had a definite similar bond there in our narratives that we're pushing out here. So once again, PA, thanks so much for joining us today. For those listening, you can go to our website. We'll do a blog post where we'll put up a link to the documentary. In the beginning, there was Light, which you can watch on Vimeo for like $5 or something. It's definitely worth it to rent that and watch it. I highly recommend it. It's a really entertaining movie, for one, and just packed full of information. And like I said, PA literally, he does the work in that film. He goes and he travels all over the world, and it's really well done. And also love, as someone who grew up Catholic and was an altar server and stuff, seeing that the mysticism in the Catholic tradition was really interesting, or in the Christian tradition, that there's a great tradition of fasting and not eating with the saints and stuff. So you really tie it all together, and it's really wonderfully done. So we'll have that in the show notes, the link to that, as well as your website and all that. For those that enjoyed this talk, please subscribe here. If you're watching this on YouTube later, subscribe to us on YouTube and share, like the video. That really helps us out. And DLive here, if you're watching, you can join us. We do this every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on dlive.tv/Alfa Vedic. You can actually join in on the conversation and ask questions and stuff. Please follow us there. And you can get all the information on alfavedic.com, join our mailing list and everything. That's ALFAVEDIC, alfavedic.com. Thanks again, PA. Everyone, have a blessed day, and thanks for listening. Take care.